Today is January 26th, 2018. My name is Joe Todd. This is an interview with John Martin in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
I was born in Santa Maria, California, on what is now Vandenberg Air Force Base.
And when's your birthday?
July 16th, 1955.
1955. Who is your father?
William Paul Milligan.
Milligan.
G-A-N. Yeah, M-I-L-L-I-G-A-N.
Your last name is Martin.
Long story.
Okay, I'll
Long story. Way too long.
Okay.
It involves defibrillators and lots of electricity.
Okay. And your mother?
My mother's Rachel Delk was her maiden name.
D-E-L-K.
D-E-L-K.
Did you go through school at Vandenberg Air Force Base?
No. Actually, I grew up in Ventura County, about 100 miles south of Vandenberg Air Force Base, and went to school in Camarillo, California.
And you graduated high school in what year?
1974.
1974. From Ventura High School?
Camarillo High School.
I'm sorry, you said that.
C-A-M-A-R-I-L-L-O.
Okay. Who is your favorite teacher?
Oh. My favorite teacher in high school would have to be Lee Davis.
Why was he your favorite?
He was the band director. And I knew how to play the violin and the guitar and read music. And a friend of mine said, hey, why don't you come with the band? And Lee Davis gave me a chance. Mm-hmm. And before that 4 years was up, I'd gone from being a cymbal player in the marching band to French horn, first chair French horn player, and I was the drum major of the band when I was a senior.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was the first one to, well, you don't have what we might be looking for. Well, come on in anyway. Let's see what you can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you recall the assassination of President Kennedy?
Oh, yes.
Where were you?
I was second grade at El Rancho School in Camarillo, California. And we went outside for recess, and a couple of the older kids were talking about it already. We hadn't heard about it in my class. And the thing I was thinking was, this is 1963, not 1863. We don't do this kind of stuff anymore. But when we went back into class, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And your father was military?
Yes. He was Air Force, career Air Force. Mm-hmm. Although him and my mom split up when I was 3. And I didn't see him again until I was almost 40, about 3 weeks before I turned 40. My mom remarried to a guy who was a police officer, and he had been in the Army and was spent the Korean War with the 82nd Airborne Division, and then got out, went back to Ventura County where he'd mostly grown up, and became a police officer. So, and then he adopted me and my 2 brothers later on.
Okay. As a boy, what chores did you do around the house?
Oh, dear heavens, lots. As soon as, growing up, it was always, of course, clean the room was a given. Making the bed was military. Straight up, back in the Army Airborne days for him. Hospital corners, ounce a quarter, the whole 9 yards. But then as we got old enough, taking care of the family dog, taking out the trash, washing the dishes. When I got old enough, they felt I was old enough for a power mower, mowing the yards. And then as I got a little bit older, and my mom went to work as well, watching my younger siblings after school.
Okay. What did you do after high school?
After high school, I joined the Navy. Right, I mean, literally, I went. By this time, my mom and my adopted father had split up. My mom was living in San Diego with my stepfather, who really influenced me probably more than anybody
What's
else.
your stepfather's name?
My stepfather's name was Nels, Nels Swenson. Yeah, so my mom was married 3 times. My adopted father was married twice. My biological father was married twice. I tell people my family tree looks like a briar patch. But they all had some, they all influenced me in some incredible ways. Nels was a reservist with the Naval Air Reserve and flew in P-2 Neptunes out at Point Mugu for a while. And then when my mom moved in with him in San Diego, he transferred to a helicopter squadron and flew in helicopters for a while. So when I got to right after high school, I moved to actually Imperial Beach in San Diego with them, and loved watching the helicopters. Before, when I was in high school, I loved watching the P-2 Neptunes fly. And so I rolled into, on my birthday on July 16th, 1974, about 4 weeks out of high school, walked into the Navy recruiter's office and said, I want to join the 4x10 program, the reserve program that they had, and I want to be an AW, Aviation Anti-Submarine Warfare operator. I was like, okay. So I took all the battery tests and did that other stuff. And just less than 3 weeks later, on August 12th, I was inducted into the Navy. Started boot camp in San Diego.
Let me ask, did you, in high school, did you discuss Vietnam in high school?
We discussed it a lot. It was, Vietnam was kind of a strange thing for people of my age, because we grew up watching Walter Cronkite in the Vietnam War. And literally, me and most of the people that I knew, you know, we were fairly conservative. We weren't sure what was going on, but whether or not anything was going on, we knew. It was kind of like when you graduated from high school, if you had money, you went to college. If you didn't have money, you went to Vietnam. And that was just how it was growing up. And my dad was that raised me, was a police officer. College wasn't going to be something that I did. So I knew right away, I was going to be joining the Army and going to Vietnam. And then when my stepfather showed up and he was flying, it was like, oh, didn't care about whether it was dangerous or not. It's like, I want some of that. That was, I knew. It was the first time I saw that P-2 Neptune come in and taxi in and stop on the ramp at Point Mugu. I knew that's what I wanted to be part of.
Why'd you join the Navy or the Army or the Marines or Air Force?
I joined the Navy mostly because of my stepfather, Nels. And with the Navy, it was like I could fly. I knew I'd be able to fly in the Navy. I didn't have, like I said, my Army exposure was mostly because my adopted father had been a paratrooper. And most of us figured, that's where we were going to end up, was in the Army. Like I said, Nels came at just the right junction in my life, just walked in like, here it is, and okay, and the whole direction of my life changed after that. So, like I said, just at the right person at the right time. And that was how I ended up in the Navy instead.
Tell me about boot camp.
Oh, boot camp was fun. Boot camp was fun. I was Company 74-933, which was a special company, they called it, because they most of the companies they referred to them as rifle companies. They did the whole marching with the rifle, the 1903 Springfield with the lead-filled barrels. But when I got there, they said when I got to boot camp, the first thing they said was, is there anybody that was like on a rifle drill team in high school or in a marching band or sang in a choir or anything like that? Come over here. So we all did. And they interviewed us and actually auditioned us for this. And we weren't sure what it was all about, but after about 5 weeks, 6 weeks maybe, first half of boot camp, we were just like everybody else. We marched, we carried that 1903 Springfield. We did all that, but then about the halfway point, we turned in our rifles, and then we went to the different specialties. So we still had to do everything, all the classes, all the training that everybody did, but we didn't march with rifles anymore. Because of somebody I went to high school with who got there about a month before I did, that I ran into, he was in the Drum and Bugle Corps, and he had a chat with the chief who was the director of the Drum and Bugle Corps. And when I got there, it's like, okay, you're the drum major. Here you go. Boom. I was so yeah. It was kind of interesting because my grandfather and my stepfather both went to boot camp there at San Diego, where I did. We were the last company to go through boot camp in San Diego in Open Bay Barracks. And it turned out that my barracks was the same one my stepfather had gone. So, yeah. We both lived. I asked my grandfather years later. I said, "Hey, what barracks did you stay in?" He says, "You kidding? I went through in the 30s. We didn't have barracks. We had tents and hammocks. But yeah, yeah. But we all three of us went through at San Diego."
What's your most vivid memory of boot camp?
My most vivid memory of boot camp was the night. It was October. It was first Saturday in October 1974. We had been out in town for a parade, Mexican Independence Day parade with the Drum and Bugle Corps. We came back, we were talking about all the people we'd seen. Some of us that were from that area had family members and all that. And our recruit chief petty officer, the guy who was the senior boot in our company, he had the duty that night. He came in and said, "Guys, come on, let's go. Everybody form up." And it was like 10:30 at night. It was like, what? Says, "Remember that shot with the square needle they promised you? We're getting it tonight." So what had happened was that was the day they discovered there had been an outbreak of what they called infectious hepatitis then. Now I believe it's called Hep C. So, and there's like 10,000 guys, and they gave every single one of us a gannoglobulin shot that night. They lined us up, eight, the companies were 8 wide and however deep, and we marched over to this one building, and you split off, your rank split off, and went into this room. And as you're coming into the room, you're unfastening your belt and getting ready, and you came up to it, and there were these like high school tables, the single tables for desks for the high school, and the guy was there, and he had in front of him he had a tray stacked a foot deep with syringes, and a tray next to him with empty syringes, and you showed him your butt, he wiped it with alcohol, gave you the shot, and you were on. And it was just the whole thing took less than a minute. And they gave 10,000 people a gannoglobulin shot that night. Yeah. That was one of the big ones. That was one of the big ones.
Okay. What did you do after boot camp?
After boot camp, I went to well, actually when I was in boot camp, I failed my flight physical. I had a somewhat lazy corpsman. I took my flight physical, and they said, "You don't have 20/20 vision right now today. You need to go get glasses." So I went into the optometry department there at San Diego, and the guy he squirted this stuff in my eyes, threw the things on, the things on to check my prescription, and he zipped through that so fast I couldn't keep up. Pulled him off, said, "Now you've got amblyopia. We can't give you glasses." And I said, "But I won't pass my flight physical. Tough luck." Okay, well, I'm here on a guaranteed A school program, so now what do we do? So I was thinking, well, I'm just going to go home, and this one first class AX, Aviation Anti-Submarine Warfare Technician,
okay.
He said, "Okay, look, here's the deal." He says, "I know you're thinking you're going to go home, but because you want to fly, and you can't, but you can." He says, "Don't worry about what those guys over there are doing." He says, you did well enough one time to pass with 20/20 vision. You're probably just tired and worn out, and you're not seeing as well as you normally would." He says, "Go from AW, Anti-Submarine Warfare Operator, to Anti-Submarine Warfare Technician." So I did, and so when I went to Millington, Tennessee, for my what they call A school, and so I ended up in the avionics school, taking the basic avionics course. Of course, there's the aviation fundamentals, and then with the BE&E, basic electronics and electricity class, and then the avionics course where we learned computers and radar and radios and all the fun stuff. Yeah, and I ended up being the drum major of the volunteer band when I was in A school. Yeah, it was, and I enjoyed it a lot.
So how long that school lasted?
That school, let's see, I got there on Halloween, so October 30. I got there October 31st of 1974, and I graduated and left on April 2nd of 1975.
What type of training did you have at
Millington
Millington?
was all aviation and electronics. How to be safe around airplanes, although we never actually went and did anything around the airplanes, but it was classroom training.
Okay.
But when we got to the avionics school, there was a lot of it that was hands-on. They had, you know, the trainers for the radios and the radar and some of the other stuff.
Okay. So from Millington, where'd you go?
Millington, I went to what was supposed to be my drill site, my reserve unit, which was Naval Air Station North Island, the Naval Air Reserve Unit at North Island.
North Island.
But while I was in
So
Millington,
where's North Island?
North Island is in San Diego. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, North Island, San Diego. It's actually on the island of Coronado.
Okay.
While I was in Millington, because I was in as a reservist, what I was supposed to do was active duty for training from boot camp through the school, the avionics school, and then go back to my unit in San Diego, be processed off of active duty, and then start doing 1 weekend a month. But I enjoyed active duty so much that they offered me the chance when I was in Millington to sign up for what they called at the time the TAR program, Training and Administration of Reserves. So basically, I was active duty, had the green military ID card, the whole shot, active duty, but I was attached to the Naval Air Reserve. And so all of the reserve units have got active duty people, and you know from the Army, we had the active duty people who fix the airplanes, fly the airplanes, keep everything going in between the drill weekends when the reservists came. So when I got to North Island, they said, "Hey, you've been picked up for this one, and you're going to this." It was my stepfather's old P2 squadron, but they had transitioned. They were transitioning to P3. He says, "You're going to this unit at Point Mugu, California, 10 miles from where I grew up." So they said, since you're fresh out of avionics school, we're going to send you to Nauru Medical, and you're going to work there for 2 weeks. Naval Air, the Air Reserve Unit's medical department.
Okay.
At North Island.
Okay.
So we're going to send you to the medical, and you're going to work there for a couple of weeks while we process you out. So I went there, and it was fun. Learned a lot, and I told the first class, I want to say his HM1 Rupert, I believe was his name, said, this is what happened to me in boot camp. And he said, "Well, that doesn't sound right. Let's get you a flight physical." Okay, so he got me to flight physical. I was pretty well rested, and I managed to get 20/20 vision again on my flight physical. It's like, okay, here you go. You're good to go, ready, off and running. So they processed me out after a couple of weeks. I spent a couple of weeks just taking it easy. Came back. They put me on active duty and transferred me to Point Mugu to VP 65.
VP 65?
VP 65. Patrol Squadron 65.
Okay.
Yeah, the V in the military lingo for squadrons. The V is fixed wing, P is patrol.
Okay.
So, and yes, they were transitioning to P3 Orions.
What, P3 Orions?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, the big 4-engine submarine hunters, great airplanes. So I got there, told them that I wanted to fly, had a good flight physical, and they said, "Well, you're an E2, and you have to be you can be an in-flight maintenance technician, but you have to be an E4 before we can send you to school." Okay, fine. you know, I can do that. And they sent me to the avionics shop where we had this. Of course, the P3s had much newer avionics in them than the P2s did. And the one that really made it work, we had this system by Magnavox, and they called it AQA7 DIFAR. And basically, this was the system where they throw the sonobuoys in the water and listen for the submarines, listen for things going on. And it was the most complicated thing around. And and I was getting there about the time those planes got there. Mm-hmm. Nobody had ever seen this before and had any experience with it. So let me see what I can do, you know. And we had a tech rep from Magnavox, a guy named Bob Miller. Took me under his wing, taught me everything I needed to know and more. And then I had another guy. When I got to the shop the first day, my sea daddy, if we call him. You know, there's always that senior NCO that they give to the new guy to. His name was Mike Wagner. Mm-hmm. His nickname was Daddy Wags, and Mike was the most unmilitary guy I ever saw. You know, but he was, you know, his mustache was out of rags, his hair was out of rags. He didn't have a Navy ball cap. He had a New York Yankees ball cap with a second class crow on it. I mean, but Mike was one of those guys. Mike was like everybody's hero. Mike had been to Vietnam, and he flew. He was an air crewman with VO-67, which was at the time super secret squadron that planted seismic detection devices along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You talk to those old Navy guys from back then about VO-67, and they referred to it as the Navy's kamikaze squadron because they only lasted for about a year. Their casualty rate was so high, they lost most of their airplanes, lost several of their people. It was quite crazy. And so he was one of the survivors of VO-67. So he was really somebody. He'd been there, done that. And Mike taught me the finer points of being a maintenance guy on airplanes. You know, when the box comes in, from the repair facility, don't trust that they put that spare fuse in there. Check for yourself. Make sure when you safety wire this stuff, do a good job. And attention to detail. He taught me a lot of attention to detail. And so between that and working on the DIFAR system, I got there. It was the end of April. In August, VP-65 did their first ACDUTRA with the P-3 Orions outside of the U.S. And we went to Guam for our first 2-week ACDUTRA. The air crew at the time, they flew over on the P-3s along with certain people that they needed. The rest of us, we flew from Point Mugu to Guam and back 2 weeks later on old C-118s. So I will tell people, it's like I'm old enough. I have flown on military airplanes with piston-driven engines, and I went to war on a wooden ship. The USS Impervious, an old Korean War minesweeper in the Gulf War. So we went to Guam, and by that time, even though I was just an E2, I was the DIFAR technician. And so when they're looking for somebody, you know, there's always somebody's got to do those jobs. Yes. That, you know, somebody's got to go wash dishes. Somebody's got to go clean the compartments. Somebody's got to do all these little jobs that need to be done, but nobody wants to do. And I didn't have to do that because I was critical to the shop. Mm-hmm. So that was first trip overseas.
What did you do in Guam?
In Guam, we augmented our regular Navy counterpart squadron. I forget which squadron it was, but we flew. That was the one thing. When you came over, when you went out and you deployed operationally, they didn't care if you were one of the active duty squadrons or one of the reserve squadrons. It was another airplane and another air crew that got thrown into the mix. So we were out there. I worked on the airplanes. I fixed the airplanes for 2 weeks. Our flight crews, they were out. They were flying maritime air patrols in the South China Sea. You know, going down out of the South China Sea and just doing all that stuff. Chasing Soviet trawlers and submarines in the Pacific. We did it all. Came back and I had made somewhat of a name for myself as as a hard worker and doing it, and the fact that my stepfather had flown in the squadron before me and was well known and well liked, except for the guys that flew loved him. He was one of the greatest guys around, so I had those guys kind of looking out for me. The guys in the avionics shop were like, "Well, you're okay in spite of being his stepkid," because it's like no. He never could quite get it right, but that's okay. I was Swede's kid, and some of these guys I'd known since I was in high school, So something, I don't even know how it worked, but one day this chief, Jack Packard, came up and said, "You're going to IFT school."
IFT.
In-flight technician.
Okay.
P3 in-flight maintenance technician. I said, "I'm an E3, I'm not an E4 yet." He says, "Don't worry about it. You're going." Okay, fine. So I headed off. My school was 8 weeks long.
Where?
Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. Naval Air Station Willow Grove, just outside of Philadelphia. And he said, "As soon as you get there, we want you to go over," because there were two squadrons, VP-64 and VP-66, reserve squadrons out of there. He said, "Go over to one of those squadrons and get on a flight. The first weekend you're there, get it, go. Because as soon as you get on, now that you're going to school, as soon as you get on that airplane, we can start your flight pay." I didn't wait for the weekend. I got out of school the first day, whenever. "You got anything yet?" "Right now." Boom, off we went. So 8 weeks of school. I actually took the test for E4, for third class petty officer, while I was in school. Got out the end of August, 1976. Had a year and a half to get through all of the stuff and qualify and get my wings as an in-flight technician, but I got my wings on the 15th of October, I believe it was, and I put on third class on the 16th of October. So I was full up and qualified before I was supposed to even be eligible to go to school. Then the following January, when the evaluation team came out from Willow Grove, where they were stationed, I took another series of tests and another check ride and became a NATOPS evaluator. The NATOPS is I don't even remember, Navy Operation, whatever. It's basically it's the program that all of the flyers do, and they have what they call a NATOPS manual. This is the big book of your airplane.
Yes.
And the big book of your airplane, and I was as a brand new E4, fresh out of flight technician school, I was an evaluator.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, like I said, that was January '77. So I mean, I was moving up quick. '78, we went back to Guam. I went for 5 weeks. Same kind of thing, flying patrols out of Guam.
You were looking for what?
That was during the height of the Cold War. So we were chasing Russian submarines. We're chasing Soviet submarines around the Pacific. We also we sent one flight out one night, search and rescue, when a C-130 from VQ-3 there in Guam crashed. I believe it was coming out of Wake Island, crashed and killed everybody. Yeah, that was a tough one for everybody that was on the island. I mean, they were stationed out of Guam, and a little place, only a few people. So yeah, it affected everybody. So we did that. Chased Russian submarines. Chased a couple of trawlers. Just did that kind of stuff. Maritime patrol, patrolling the sea lanes, looking to see who's where and what they're doing. 78, when my tour was up, I got out. I was going to go to college and study oceanography in San Diego, and stayed in the reserves. Went to work for Dynelectron Corporation at the Pacific Missile Test Center, literally just across the runway from my old hangar. And where I worked on EC-121s that they used for the range birds out there for the missile center. And the reason they were looking for somebody like me was because they were transitioning from the EC-121 super constellations to the P-3 Orions, and they had a couple of them already. And while I was there, we were involved in the Harpoon project. We had one of our P-3s was the test bed for the Harpoons, for the air-launched Harpoon missiles. Worked there for about 6 months, went to Guam for 2 weeks again, and in the fall, it's like, you know, I instead of going to college, I ended up getting married instead. And so I went back in the Navy as a TAR again. And
when did you go back in the Navy?
I went back in October of, October of 1978. I was only out for about 6 months.
Back on active duty?
Back on active duty, as a TAR. They transferred me there. I went from there to back to Millington, Tennessee, Naval Air Station, Memphis, to a patrol squadron, the P-3 squadron there, VP-67. And I was there for 3 years. They had just transitioned to the P-3 Orions from the P-2 Neptunes. First winter, and there was some kind of paperwork mix-up. You know, they sent me to Memphis as a ground maintenance technician instead of a flight technician. So now they've got this NATOPS instructor flight technician, and they don't have a billet for him, in a flying billet for him. So what do? So they sent me to radio operator school in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, that January. 2 weeks, 2 weeks of radio operator school. I came back. They'd let me start flying ahead of that. So then I got certified as a radio operator and a flight technician. I was qualified in 2 seats. Long hours, lots of traveling. Enjoyed the traveling a lot. That trip, of course, the VP-65, they took me to Hawaii and Guam and the Philippines and Japan and Alaska, all over the Pacific. VP-67 was technically a Pacific squadron, so I went to all of those places as well with VP-67. But VP-67 also got me to Lodges Air Force Base in the Azores, got me to Rota, Spain, and one trip, very memorable trip, in February, it got me to Sandestrom, Greenland. 100 miles north of the Arctic Circle in February. We were supposed to fly in, get a minimum crew rest, and fly back out again. There was an E-2 Hawkeye that had broken down there, and they'd gotten their repairs done, but they didn't have the carrier air wing had left. And the E-2s didn't have the long-range navigation to get all the way back. So the idea was they were going to follow us back stateside from Greenland. But our airplane kept breaking down because of the cold. The high that week was 67 below zero. You know, and like, you open up that door and that 67-degree weather hits you, like, no, I want to go back home. And the airplane didn't like it any more than I did. You know, we hydraulic seals just don't do well in that cold. It took us 4 days. We couldn't get, you know, we were away from everything. We got lucky. The Danish Air Force in the hangar right next to us had a C-130 squadron with lots and lots of parts, and a lot of the stuff, because they're both Lockheed birds, same engine, same everything. A lot of the stuff was interchangeable, so the Danish Air Force kept us supplied, and we finally, the E-2 Hawkeye's going, yeah, we got a 141 leaving, we're following it home, and then we finally ended up getting out of there. So yeah, it was fun.
I'd like to ask, when you go into Spain and these places, do you have any contact with the local people?
Oh, always. What
was their reaction to you?
They, you know, sometimes it was nothing. A lot of times in the military towns, it was like, hey, they're coming here. They're spending money on our economy. They want to have some fun. We want to have their money. Sometimes some of them loved us. Some of them didn't. Some of them were just like, they saw us as a mark. You know, Philippines especially. You know, it was like some of them loved us, but mostly they loved our money. But that was because, you know, we were there. We want to blow off some steam, have some fun, and we're leaving again. We're not part of the community. We're just in and out. But for the most, my experience with the locals, really, other than, like I said, other than a few folks, you know, finding ways to get me to give them my money, I never had any problems with the locals in any of those places. You know, I mean, I knew some guys in Barbers Point, like, oh, I hate these local Hawaiians. They're terrible. Why? It's like, well, you know, they beat so-and-so up last week. Why'd they do that? Oh, he got drunk and was driving his car through a sugarcane field. Like, well, no kidding. You know, this is their livelihood. This is their business, and you're destroying their product. You're taking money out of their pocket. They're not going to thank you for that, you know. So, you know, I was never the ugly American kind of guy, you know. And of course, by this time, I became a Buddhist in 1977 on a trip to Hawaii. Actually, a friend of mine from high school had moved there, and so you know, we had a lot of Japanese people and military guys who'd married Japanese women in the organization. So I'd already had that international stuff going anyway. But then being with people from other cultures on a daily basis always helped. Being in the military was really good, because, you know, how many people do we know that never leave the area where they grew up? You know, I know people who've never been out of Tulsa County. You probably know people who've never lived anywhere but Bartlesville. Their whole life never left. And so now you get in the military and you're living, especially in boot camp in an open bay barracks, you're living in close quarters with people who are nothing like you. You know, different races, different colors, different backgrounds. You know, being a kid from the suburbs of Southern California, one of my friends was actually from Hulbert. One of the kids in my boot camp company. We were as different as night and day, but we got along great. You know, we understood each other. And that's one of the things I think that travel and just being, you know, spending some real good quality time with people who are different than you is good for all of us. I think we'd be a better country if more people did that. So yeah, so I never really and truly, like I said, there was always those folks that are just like, you know, he's a nice guy, I'm going to get some of his money. That never bothered me that much. It was the learning experience, you know. But I never had any problems whatsoever with any of the locals. I tried everything. I did everything I could to fit in and find out what their life was about. Yeah. You know, so that was, you know, even in the Gulf War when I was in Saudi Arabia, you know, I never had any problem with any of those folks because, you know, they were a little bit different, but they weren't all that different. You know, the guys I knew that had families, they were still am I, you know, next payday, these bills are due. Yes. Are my kids going to get good grades? Are they going to get to go to good school? I mean, most people in the world that I've met, they worry about the same basic things that we do, right? So yeah, never had any of that problem. Yeah, and now VP 67 was, like I said, I got to Europe and places in the Atlantic. Bermuda, got to go to Bermuda. That was a fun place to go. Chasing again, the Cold War, chasing submarines out of Bermuda, and the Azores and all over. The Mediterranean when we would go to Spain, but our Act Dutra was still, because we were technically a Pacific squadron, our Act Dutra was still somewhere in the Pacific. We'd pretty much moved past Guam, and I did a couple of times, a couple of the Act Dutra periods, 5-6 weeks. We went to Kadena, Okinawa, which was interesting because out of Kadena we would go all over the place. We would fly we would fly down to the Philippines and run operations out of the Philippines. We would, of course, flying up and down the coast of Asia, flying to Japan. One year, it was Kadena, and we were flying south off the coast of Vietnam. We'd flown to the Philippines, and we were tasked out of the Philippines. We were flying the patrolling the sea lanes between across Southeast Asia, and the nickname for that route was the Yellow Brick Road. Lots and lots of times on the Yellow Brick Road, and in this one time we're flying. That was the last year I was there. Let's see, that was 79, 1980. We were flying out of Kadena, doing the Yellow Brick Road out of the Philippines. Our main mission was patrolling the sea lanes, but that was when all of the Vietnamese refugees were leaving. There's some pretty sad folks there. Anyway, so we're flying the Yellow Brick Road, and we're watching on the radar, and all of a sudden this one big target that was a cargo ship flagged out of Japan. That cargo ship, suddenly there was a big target and a little target on the radar. I was like, this doesn't look right. So we flew up to check it out, and the little target was a sampan, like a 22-foot sampan, jammed with people. There was like 18, 19 people in this boat. The cargo ship didn't do anything with them because maritime law says you find somebody that's in trouble on the sea, you get them, you rescue them. It's required. A lot of the Japanese companies at the time where you pick any of those people up, you're fired. I mean, the captain was going to lose his job and be blackballed if he picked these people up, so there's nothing he could do. So we had a few things that we could do. We had what we were going to do. We would see if we could figure out how many of them there were, what they were doing, and then we would drop a sonobuoy right next to them. And the idea was they would get the sonobuoy, get the hydrophone, and they could at least talk to us. We did that. They didn't know what to do with it. We dropped it, and they're like, okay, this thing fell out of the sky near us. What are they trying to help us, or are they trying to hurt us? What's going on? We couldn't figure, we dropped a second one. They just, didn't know it. So finally, my radar operator, a guy named Don Dyer, Double D we called him. He's like, okay, give me, and we had like a plug for the sonobuoy launch tubes, and it was a piece of styrofoam about that long and about that big around, and he got a marker, and he drew pictures of airplane with this thing falling out and then pulling it, just they put it all out in pictures, dropped the thing, literally, I don't know how we did it, we dropped that sucker right in the boat. And they looked at it. Oh, next thing we know, they're grabbing that hydrophone and just jabbering away. Of course, we weren't sure. It's like how long we were there for a long time. Maybe somebody speaks. Nobody spoke English. Not a single person spoke English. So we're just like, now what do we do? So what we did then was we went and we found we had a special handheld radio. VHF radio that was different than everything else in the airplane, so that we could talk to the merchant ships. And we found this one merchant ship had a Scottish captain on it. He said, look, we got these guys that they're in trouble. I mean, their motor's broken down and they're adrift 150 miles out in the middle of the South China Sea. If somebody doesn't help these folks, they're all dead.
Yeah.
So they had a Scottish captain. It's like, hey, we'll go get them. It's like, you're sure these are Vietnamese refugees? Yeah, I know, no problem, go. So the captain took his ship over, pulled them up, and said, hey, okay, just so you know, we got them. Everybody's on board. Everybody's safe. There's a woman here that's 9.5 months pregnant. Went into labor as soon as we got her on board. We're even pulling their boat up out of the water and taking it with us so it doesn't become a hazard to navigation. And they took them to Singapore and put them. They were relocating. They had refugee camps, I guess, for these folks in Singapore. So they took them to Singapore. And oddly enough, years later, I ran into a guy that had that story. I was on this boat. We got picked up after the airplane flew over. Woman was pregnant and gave birth right there, right after we got on the ship. And like, were you one of the guys in that boat? So that was, and that was when I got my first real medal. I mean, I had my good conduct medal, and I had my, my National Defense Medal because I joined, 3 days before the cutoff for the Vietnam War period. But I got a humanitarian service medal. And that's one of two out of all the awards that I have. That one and my Navy Commendation Medal for Valor during Desert Shield, not Desert Storm, Desert Shield. Those two, they mean the most to me. So then we got those folks rescued. There's like 22 of them, and then we found another boat. And it had about 20 people on it, and some of them didn't look very good. They weren't, most of them would get up and wave and try to get our attention. Some of them just were laying in the bottom of the boat. We didn't know if they were sick, dead, what. But we were just about out of gas. We couldn't stay long enough to get them rescued. So what we did was we had a package that we carried with us when we were on those flights, with food and water and stuff that that they might need to survive. Basically, an at-sea survival kit. We kicked that out to them, and then right about that time, the next P3 on station was coming, and they managed to get those folks picked up and rescued and on their way to Singapore. Everybody went to Singapore. That was one of the highlights of my time in VP-67. We worked hard, we played hard, had a good time. Yeah, and I think 81 was my last active deployment with VP-67, and that was my first actual deployment to the Philippines. And I didn't get taken quite as much during that one, only once or twice for little bits, as opposed to before, when I was only there for a day or two. And they know, they could see you're fresh off the plane. The weird thing was when we got done with that flight, because they always used to say, if you want to know what your squadron's doing, everything is super secret and nobody's going to tell you anything. If you're in the Philippines, you go out to town and you ask the girls in the bar because they know everything. Yes. In fact, we got back from that flight after rescuing the refugees, and everybody went to debrief. The flight engineer and I put the airplane to bed, went and changed, and we were the first people out the gate, first two in the crew out the gate. We go into the bar, we order drinks, like, hey, where are you from? Like, well, here, we're with this P3 squad. Oh, are you the guys that rescued those Vietnamese refugees today? I'm like, okay, we haven't been back on the ground for 2 hours, and everybody in town knows that we did this. I was like, they had the most amazing intel network that I've ever seen. It was crazy. My time, October 1981, my time was done. Time was done in VP-67. I transferred back to VP-65 in 1981. Did the same stuff, radio operator, flight technician, instructor, and then they had a flight technician instructor. I ran the air crew, the radio operator and flight technician desk and aircrew training for a while. I ran the line check for a while. Just a little, they move you around to all the different spots. And in early 1983, they'd had an event on the base earlier, a couple of years, about a year before I got back, where there was some intel that the some Puerto Rican nationalists, part of the Puerto Rican independence movement. They were going to attack the base, with bombs or whatever. And the guy who was the CEO of the base at that time, I'm so glad I wasn't there. He's like, not on my watch. So he took every sailor, E6 and below, and gave them an M14 and a magazine full of ammunition. Right? Now, if you're in the Navy, when I went to boot camp, we went to the range one day. It was an indoor range. They gave us 20 rounds out of a bolt action 22 rifle, and that was it. That was all of our firearms. Now you got a couple of hundred sailors that are literally fingertip to fingertip apart with a loaded M14 rifle. He gave every chief and above, every E7 and above, a 45, and they just stood out there all night long, waiting for them to come. The next morning, the sun came up. Puerto Rican nationalists didn't show up. Nobody shot themselves or somebody else. And he said, I got to do something different. So about that time...
When did that happen?
That would have been the summer of '81, I think, because it was not too long before I got back to Point Magoo. So he wanted to do something a little bit different. And he wanted to start a small team of volunteers. It was going to be a part-time deal to train up. And so you have somebody that could respond to this kind of thing that, he didn't have to worry too much about. About the same time, the FBI was looking for a place to train police department SWAT teams. The '84 Olympics was coming up. And people were scared to death. Everybody was worried about terrorism at the '84 Olympics in Los Angeles. So the FBI couldn't find anywhere to train these people, and they came to the base, and the base commander said, listen, if you will let some of our people go through the training, take your 5-day SWAT course, we will give you everything you want. We will give you classrooms, we will give you access to our firing ranges, we will give you buildings to do your training in, we'll give you whatever you need. All you got to do is let our guys go through too. Okay, so I got put on the team in February of 1983. We were just in our infancy at that time. Went through the 5-day SWAT course, which is where Doug Kane, one of the agents, came and said, I got your record, you're a draft dodger, right? Because I was late getting registered. I've been in the Navy for 9 years, still had my draft card, but I'm still somewhere there's a record somewhere of me as a draft evader. So we did that, quite intense, and we started building the teams. And I was an assistant team leader. We had 4 teams of 22 people, so that we could rotate, and it got really busy. And that became our collateral duty. So instead of standing desk watches or ramp watches at my squadron, I went to the team a couple days a month. We augmented the Secret Service. Ronald Reagan was president then, and whenever he would go out to the ranch, he would fly into Point Magoo. And so my first Secret Service job was the front line. So we went into our brief with the Secret Service. We got our weapons and holstered them, and we went out on the front line, and just basically in between the president and the crowd. That was the first gig. But then as we started getting more sophisticated, our skill sets improved. When Reagan would come to town, there were always those that were on the front line, but there were some of us that, we got the M16s and we were riding behind the CAT team, which is when Air Force One lands, there's a black Suburban full of, we call them the ninjas. They're all dressed in black. They've got MP5s, and they're behind Air Force One, screaming down the runway. Their job is if somebody on the side of the runway starts taking shots at the airplane, they get out and they lay down suppressing fire. But they don't stay. They get back in the car and they've got to stay close to Air Force One. What our job was, if that happened, we pull up behind them and we take care of the bad guys after they've moved on. And just a few other things, depending upon the threat, lots of stuff. We had all 80 of us in our armory one day. We needed a hostage rescue team, and they voted. It was like, okay, put down on your paper, if you were a hostage, who would you want who on this team would you want coming through the door to rescue you? And so there were 6 of us that were chosen by the team to be the hostage rescue. It wasn't a volunteer. It was, we want, if I'm captured by bad guys, I want you coming through the door. And I was the point man on the hostage rescue team, and I was also kind of the electronics technician. Every once in a while, I would come into the locker room, and the chief, Morgan, he was an air traffic control chief. He'd have a tri-wall or two full of stuff. He'd been to DRMO. He'd been to salvage. Hey, check this out. And he'd bring this stuff in, and I'd take it home. I was like, okay, let me see what I can do with this. Because like I said, I didn't have a full-time job working out, so I would take the stuff home and play with it, in the living room while I'm watching TV. And he brought in, we had seismic detection devices that you plant out there, and you can listen to people. He brought in a tri-wall full of broken binoculars. He brought, and I would take the stuff home and take it apart and get enough good parts to make a good one, night vision goggles and just not necessarily personnel detection radar, so you could put it out there and you could hear people coming towards you. All that stuff. So I was like the electronics guy for the SWAT team. Meanwhile, I'm still flying, and we're deploying every summer and going to Japan and the Philippines and all over. The last thing that we did right before I left, we had a red cell exercise. Red cell exercise. Richard Marcinko and his merry band of marauders. So Marcinko was the guy who started SEAL Team 6. And he handpicked everybody who was in SEAL Team 6. Well, when his time there was up, they said, we need somebody to go around the country and do these anti-terrorism exercises. So he handpicked a handful of guys from SEAL Team 6 and went around doing this stuff. And it was a long 10 days.
Were you one of the guys?
No. These guys that were on the red cell team, these guys had been in the SEAL teams. They had been chosen as like the initial guys for SEAL Team 6, and so they'd done several years with SEAL Team 6, and then they moved to red cell. So these guys were some pretty tough operators. One of the things, and that was, I got my first Navy Achievement Medal out of that red cell exercise, because the electronic stuff that I've been working on, the radars, the seismic stuff, the night vision goggles and all that helped us even the playing field. I mean, they still ran rough over us, but we did well enough that a few years later, when Richard Marcinko put out his autobiography, my team was mentioned. Out of over 100 red cell exercises that he did, he talked about a couple of them, one in Rota, Spain, and ours. So that made me feel really good, tired, run down, oh yeah. But it was exciting. It was exciting. So yeah, that was how I finished up my time at Point Mugu. And the last thing on the SWAT team before I left, the guy that was running the Santa Barbara Secret Service office came down and gave me that photo inside the doorway. Ron and Nancy Reagan coming off of Air Force One at Point Mugu, and it's autographed to me from Ronald Reagan. Yeah. So I decided that having so much fun with the SWAT team, I mean, the FBI taught me how to fast rope and rappel out of helicopters. I mean, it was just a fun, and I knew I would never go back to the P-3 Navy. without something like this to have that much fun ever again, you know. So what I did was I got a set of orders to a squadron, HC-9, Helicopter Combat Support Squadron 9, in San Diego. HC-9 had been commissioned in the mid-70s after the Vietnam War. They were the Navy's only dedicated combat search and rescue unit. It had originally been HC-7 in Vietnam, and they've got quite a history over there. So they sent me to Pensacola, Florida, for air crew school and rescue swimmer school to become a wet crewman. And then I went to San Diego, to North Island again, to HC-9. I spent 4 years there. Great. Didn't get to go to all the fun places I did in the P3s, but the flying was incredible. Flying was incredible. We did lots of search and rescue exercises. We had some folks. That were over there for the Gulf of Sidra when we bombed Libya. There was all kind. We worked with the SEAL teams a lot. I got to go to SEER school in that squadron. That was an interesting thing because we worked with the SEALs who were part of the training unit there at North Island. And so whenever one of us was getting ready to go to SEER school, our buddies would take care of us, and they'd go over and say, "Hey, so and so's coming. What do you need?" You know. And
what is SEER school?
SEER, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape.
Okay.
So that's where you learn how to survive behind enemy lines, and you spend about 30 hours in a POW camp, and all night. Yeah, you spend a few days learning how to evade, and then on the last day, it's like there was no evasion. They set us loose, and within 2 minutes, we were all caught. There was no chance, and they said us that there's an area, there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide, and there's these guys in black pajamas with AK-47s. Okay, here we go, and it started. And quite an interesting school. And sometimes my buddies didn't do much to hurt me, but they had a little bit of fun with me. One guy went through, he was single. His mom was a widow. They literally, when he went to the hard cell, the guy that was interrogating was like, yeah, I know your mama, and showed him a Polaroid picture of this guy kissing his mom. And then there was always a big guy. They called him Igor all the time. He was the one that bounced you around if the interrogator didn't like your answers. And he said, "Yeah, Igor likes your girlfriend. So and so, I think her name was Donna too." And like, it's like, oh. And Igor's got a picture of him kissing his girlfriend. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that, yeah, watch out for your buddies. Have some fun. So did that, and I worked at ran the air crew training, ran the avionics shop for a while I was there, working on all the avionics equipment. I became, the official title was the Safety Petty Officer. I was an E6, and because almost all of our officers were reservists, they were only there, and they were only there once in a while, and usually they spent their time flying. I'm not here to run an office, I'm here to fly, And we flew. We had Gao 2B miniguns in the main cabin doors. We had M60s. We flew on night vision goggles. We just did it all. And so while my official title was Safety Petty Officer, I was the safety officer. The safety officer would come in, like, "How things going?" "Well, I got this. Okay, fine." And he'd be gone. He just let me run the show. And after we had our wing inspection, they came out and put us through all of our paces, and I can get pretty anal about some things. I took everything in the Navy was just starting to get desktop computers. We hadn't had PCs, but for maybe a year, not a lot was done with them. So I computerized all the records and training schedules and everything in the safety department. Took it's like, I got a copy of the wing's inspection sheet for the safety department, all the stuff I needed to have. I had 2 file cabinets I just emptied in a big pile in the middle of the office and said, okay, question number 1, has the aviation safety officer been to this school? Okay, folder 1, here's his diploma from that school. And I just went all the way on down. So did really, really well on that. Got a Navy Achievement Medal after that one. Yeah, HC9, it was a lot of fun. Helo casting and stuff like that. On the DVD that I gave you, there's about, I wasn't sure, so there's about 35 pictures on there. And it's everything from my boot camp photo to me in my dress blues, full dress blues with medals, dinner dress blues, dinner dress whites, helo casting, my team in the Gulf War, all of that stuff. So HC9 was fun, but it was just, just another tour. Mm-hmm. We spent a lot of time in Fallon, Nevada, supporting the Air Wings, doing CSAR exercises. And they had, while I was there, they had this team of guys came out one summer. It was the summer of '88, and this was the recruiting team for the Navy EOD program. And it's like, why not? So I showed up with my personnel record. They liked what they saw. Already had a top secret security clearance because I'd been a ComSec custodian and had all that stuff. I took the physical fitness test and did really, really well on it. Had a lot of extra paperwork to do because I was a late starter. I mean, I went through rescue swimmer school when I was 30. And a lot of them were like, this guy probably isn't going to make it, but I did. So I was, let's see, that was 1988 when it was late, it was the summer of '88 when I took the test for EOD, and I had just turned 33. Turned 33. Yeah, I turned 33. By the time I got everything through, I'd have a waiver. By the time I got through, I left HC9 in June of 1989, showed up in dive school, Panama City, Florida, Navy second class dive school, which is deep sea, lightweight, scuba, the whole shot. So I spent that summer in Panama City, Florida, going to school. I was like, oh my heavens, it's a summer in Panama City, hot, humid, miserable. And I'd come from Coronado. I could do anything in Coronado, but that humidity got me. It just hit us all. But so from June to September of 1989, I was in Navy second class diver school and turned 34 in dive school. Then right after that, in September, went to Eglin Air Force Base in Fort Walton Beach, Florida for 3 months of the basic core school. And that was where we learned about explosives and explosive effects, what all the different kinds of munitions were, what they would do. And that was also where we learned how to do demo. We did our demolition qualification, learned how to work with explosives, did our first disposal shots, blowing up old ordnance that was no longer any good. Did that. Late November, went to Indian Head, Maryland for the main part of the school. And first thing they did was, there was snow on the ground and the Potomac was frozen over. And they're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go, we need to get your dive qual started up again, so we're going for a dive this Friday. Oh, and we're thinking we're going to go in the pool. Right? And they're going like, you're Navy divers. Well, we just got out of school. Like, we don't care. You may have just got out, you're Navy divers. And you're going in the Potomac River. Oh, heavens. Yeah, in the Potomac River. So, and I haven't scanned those photos yet. But, so the ice had broken up and gone, but there was still 2 feet of snow on the ground. And so while we had 3 or 4 folks in our class that had rolled back into the class, because I mean this is one of those schools where a lot of people get through it, but not everybody gets through it the first time. They'll go through, and at one point or another they'll fail something, and then they get rolled back and take that section of the school again. There were 31 of us. that started dive school in my class on day one. And out of the 31, 10 of us made it out of dive school. And out of that 10, the next summer when we finally finished, there were 8 of us who were in the original class left. So we had a lot more that graduated with us, but they had rolled back.
Why so many dropouts?
It's terribly difficult class. I mean, they say that the only course that the Navy has that is more physically demanding than BUDS, where they train the SEALs, is the Navy second class dive school. You know, you go to dive school, it's some serious stuff. And the Navy didn't have their own EOD dive school then. But they do now. They were working on that when I went through. I was one of the lucky, I consider myself lucky because I got that little second class. I can say I'm a deep sea diver. They can't say that anymore, right? So deep sea school was tough. The only thing more physically rigorous was BUDS. The academic portion that came later with EOD school, they told us that the only classes, the only course the Navy has that's more academically demanding than EOD school at that time was the nuclear power school, the reactor school. So we had the second toughest academics and we had the second toughest physical. So a lot of people didn't. Now in dive school there were 3 or 4 that came later. Everybody that made it out of dive, but there were probably 15 or 16 people out of 31 that didn't make it out of dive school. They washed out in dive school, and they weren't kids. You know, you had to be an E5 in order to go to this school. So, yeah, we probably had about 15 or 16 people didn't make it through dive school. And then, again, 8 of us at the end of dive school. But the other handful of people that rolled back, they rolled back into another class and they made it out. Everybody who made it out of dive school eventually made it through EOD school. But something would happen in one section and you'd fail a test twice, and so they would roll you back into the next class behind you. So while our class started off with all Navy guys, by the time we got to Indian Head, we had 2 or 3 Marines and a couple of Air Force people and an Army guy, and just a little kind of a mix match. So the day we're going to dive, the Army and the Air Force and the Marine, they're down there and they're shoveling snow. We're in getting wetsuits on and all that, and getting our dive gear ready. This is straight scuba, and we didn't have dry suits. We didn't have any of the fancy. These were just basic training wetsuits that get used by 100 people a year. And we come walking out in our wetsuits, and we're noticing that as our other guys are shoveling the snow off of the dock into the Potomac, the snow's not melting. The snow is floating down the river. It's that cold, like an ice cube in a drink. It's like, okay, so what we had to do was we were tethered. We had a tending line. So what we had to do was we had to get in the water and go down to the bottom, and where there was another line, and we'd give them the signal, and they would send down a length of rope about that long, and we had to tie. I forget what the knot was that we had to tie, but it was some kind of knot, fancy thing that we had to tie. And then when we got done, we give it a yank. They bring it up. If we did it right, they sent the rope back down. We had to tie a second knot, send it up, and if they liked it, they'd give us the signal, and up we go. If they didn't like it, they'd untie it and send it back down. Say, do it again. So I think I spent 10 minutes on mine, because I took my time, did it really slow, really, because I didn't want to do it twice.
The Potomac River when it's cold.
It was December in the Potomac River. Yeah, it was freezing cold.
How deep was the water?
Snow on the ground. Water wasn't that deep. It was only about 20, 25 feet deep where we were. The problem with the Potomac is it's kind of like the Mississippi. It's dark. I mean, it's dark and muddy. You hit the water, and by the time you hit 10 feet down, you can't see anything. I mean, if you want to know how deep you are, we would take our depth gauge, and we literally had to hold our depth gauge against our face mask to see it. That's how dark the water is. So we were really working in with zero visibility, doing everything by braille down there. And we spent a lot of time in that river. It was nicer in the summertime when we were diving in it, but it was still, you've got this bomb shape, 1,000-pound bomb, 1,000-pound bomb on the bottom and about 40 feet of water closer to the middle, and you've got to go down there and you've got to rig it and tie it up, using special, special hitches and stuff like that, and hook it up to a lift balloon, and you're doing all this literally by braille. We did a lot of that in the river. So it was a good school. It was a hard school. Got out of that school. Our actual graduation date was in July, but then we had 2 weeks. July of 1990.
Okay.
I turned 35 as we were doing our final. The Army and the Air Force and the Marine Corps. We had all these different sections. We had ground ordnance, which is your artillery, grenades, that kind of stuff, rockets. We had IEDs. We had nuclear weapons. And then I forget what the other one was. Air. All of the aviation stuff. Ejection seats, Maverick missiles, all this. If it had to do with an airplane or a helicopter, that was its own section. That was the hardest, one of the hardest sections of the school. That after air ordnance, the Army, Air Force, Marines, those guys, they got their EOD badge and they were gone. They were off to work. We still had 6 more weeks of underwater to do. We had to learn all the underwater ordnance, and we did most of that in Pax River. And I turned 35 about 3 days before we graduated and got our EOD badges. And then it was 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks of, we didn't have to worry about tests, but what we were doing, we learned how to use a side scan sonar. We a towed sonar array behind the boat. We learned that, and then it was off, and I had orders to the Philippines, to Mobile Unit 5. The day I left Indian Head, I got in the car, everything was packed up, I checked out, I got in the car, I drove to La Plata, filled up the car with gas to head home to Fort Walton Beach where my family was. And when I turned on the car, turned on the radio, and the first thing out of the radio was Iraq had invaded Kuwait. The day I got out of school. So it took a while to get the family clearance to go to the Philippines, because they were shooting service people in the Philippines out in town in those days. Nobody was allowed to live out in town. So we got all that stuff done. We got to the Philippines. We started off in temporary housing in San Miguel, which was a communications base about an hour or so north of Subic Bay, north of the main base. It was beautiful. I loved it. It was right on the South China Sea. There was nothing but a chain link fence between my house and the ocean. And there was a gate with a guard, so we just, maybe 150 feet down this little path and you're at the beach. It was great. Loved it there. Went to work. First day, when I called the Philippines while I was still in school, they said, "What do you want? Do you have any preferences?" Well, I had been a TAR and flew in P3s for 9 years, and then I had been in helicopters, but because P3s are too big to go on a ship. That just never happened. Helicopters did, but because we were the only combat search and rescue unit, we had to support all of the air links. So we didn't do any real ship time. We were out at Fallon when they would do their training. So I'd been in the Navy for 15 years at this time, 16 years by this time. I've been in the Navy 16 years, and I had about 8 or 9 days on a ship in all that time. So I said, look, put me on the next carrier headed out. Just, let's get that done. I want to get that done. Okay, fine. All that changed with the war. Right? So I get to the Philippines. A couple of my buddies who were single got there before me and said, "Hey, check this guy out. He's pretty bright." And they looked. It's like, "Oh, top secret clearance." I said, Closed the book. I got there. It's like, "You're not going anywhere. You're going to work in the operations department. We need folks who are book smart, computer smart, that kind of stuff. Okay, so day one at work, we go out and we PT. I come into the operations office, and there's my boss, Warrant Officer Mike Ball, who actually lives in Tonkawa, and a senior chief, E8, named Rex Schiff. Rex was the training chief. And I walk in and they're going, we got a problem. They're talking about if we don't find somebody who can operate an HF radio soon, we're hosed. And I said, I know how do you know? Well, I've been an AT for 15 years, and I was a P3 radio operator for 9 years, and Mike looked at me and said, training room with the senior chief at 9 o'clock, be there. So I went and I changed and got all, and they, what had happened is they'd bought 4 of these Harris RF 5000 HF radios, really good radios, really fancy, frequency skipping the whole shot. And they spent $180,000 on these 4 radios, and nobody knew how to turn them on. So I get over there with Rex, and he said, okay, let's see what you got. Okay, so I turn it on. I'm like, okay, single sideband, and I still knew a few frequencies from my radio operator days. So it's like, okay, first thing, here's WWVH, clocks, and okay, then here's the frequency for ADAC. So I call from the Philippines. These lots of range on these things. So I'm calling ADAC, getting radio checks with ADAC, radio checks with Hawaii. I got a radio check somewhere way east of us, and just talking with all kinds of people. And the next thing I knew, the XO comes in. How's it going? Well, him and Rex went over in the far corner. They chatted for a few minutes, and the XO comes over and says, "You want to go to the Gulf?" Huh? Says, Desert Shield's going. You want to go? Yeah. Because like I said, it was already up and running when I got there. And everybody, this was going to be the show. Something was going to happen, and it didn't matter whether you get hurt or killed. You got to be part of it. You've trained and you've trained and you've trained for all these years, and now's the time. And there were people that would do they'd stab you, their best friend in the back, in order to get a spot on a team to go over to the Gulf, right? So suddenly, I'm going, and it wasn't because I was the hottest EOD guy around. I was wet behind the ears, fresh out of school, but I knew how to operate an HF radio.
Now, HF radio is
high frequency.
Okay.
High frequency, single sideband. It's basically it runs runs in the same frequency band as a lot of the AM radio stations do. A little bit higher and a little bit lower, I think. I used to listen to the radio stations when I was flying around and bored. So I got all this stuff ready to go, and they put me in these actually 3 of the 4 radios on a plane, on a C-130 out of Clark Air Base. Flew to Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, flew to Masira, Oman for a fuel stop, and then into Bahrain, where guys picked me up. And I spent about 3 weeks with one of the electronics guys from the unit. We set up the base station. I'd set up the base station in the Philippines, set up the base station in Bahrain, where all the Navy EOD assets were
now. What is in the base station?
Base station was just basically the radio. This is where all of the Navy EOD units in the Gulf during that time were kind of run by a team out of Bahrain.
Okay.
So I set up the one in Bahrain. Dave and I went up the coast to Jubail and another place up the coast, I don't remember. Set it up with units that were up there. Interesting, really, really interesting time going up into Saudi Arabia. It was somewhat surreal because.
Did you stay at Khobar Towers?
No, I never got that. I was always along the coast.
Okay.
Never even got close to that part of Saudi. But it was really weird because in order. From Bahrain, they've got a causeway now that goes from Bahrain to Saudi Arabia and back. So we go over there and we have to stop for customs, and they do all their things, and then stamp the orders and all that, and off we go. And we were going up. It was north of Jubail somewhere, a little bitty place. The team was living out of tents, little small, not the big troop tents, but little small tents like you buy at Cabela's or something like that. So they're living out of those tents. So we're up there, and of course Dave is like, "Is this surreal?" So we're in this little blue Mazda Protege. We're armed to the teeth. We're listening to the Doobie Brothers, and we're driving through Saudi Arabia. And on the one trip when we came up, we're coming back, and it was Wednesday. And over there, the weekends are Thursday and Friday because their Sabbath is on Friday. And on Wednesday after work, everybody in Saudi Arabia is headed for Bahrain because that's like the Las Vegas of the Middle East, right? Everybody's going to Bahrain. And so we're coming back, and the traffic is backed up for like 2 miles. And Dave is like, "I'm not going to do this." And he pops there. There's one lane. It's an emergency lane. And there's not a single car in it. He gets in this lane. It's about 65. We're screaming down this lane. And we're coming up to the border crossing. I'm like, "Dave, you going to slow down?" "Nope." "What do you mean, no?" Like, "No, we're just going to keep going." I'm thinking, "Oh, these people, we're going to die. These people are going to shoot us, And so we're coming up, and he says, "Look, when we get up there, just smile and wave." Okay. So we hit this border crossing about 65 miles an hour. I'm looking out the window going, and this Saudi guy's there with his MP5 going, "Okay." No trouble whatsoever. So after we got all that done, I got sent down to Abu Dhabi. And that's where the minesweeping task force was, and I joined my team down there, Detachment 51, out of Mobile Unit 5. I did a lot of the electronic stuff. We were the first team outside the SEAL teams and like special forces and guys to get a backpack GPS. I've got a GPS in my telephone now, but this thing was like this big and had an antenna that long on it and that big around. Did the radios, did the GPS, did all of that stuff. And right before Christmas, we were up in Saudi Arabia, and we were training one of the Saudi Navy EOD teams on underwater mine countermeasures. So training went well, training was done, and we were packing up to go home, and Steve, our chief, and I shared a room in the Saudi officers' barracks. And we're packing up, getting ready to go, and suddenly this guy, Fozzie, was the only, that must have been his first name, I don't remember. He was the equivalent of an E9 Master Chief in the Saudi Navy, and he was somebody because he'd been through BUDS and he was EOD. They did it all, and we were actually on a Saudi Navy base where we operated out of up there near the port of Jubail, and that's where they had what they called their Frogman School. All their divers went to school there. That's where their Navy Officer Candidate School was. All that, and we were supported by SEAL Team 5's headquarters detachment while we were there. So Fozzie comes in and goes, "John, Steve, we found a Mayan mine, and it's this big." I'm like, no, Fozzie. And what a Mayan is a World War I Russian naval mine.
How do you spell that? Mayan.
Miyan, I believe. Okay. So it's like no, that can't be one of those because they're only about this big around. I mean, I had one in school. I had it. It's about 18 inches in diameter, about 2 feet long, and it has 3 chemical horns on it. It's like, no, I tell you, it was a mine. I said, well, how do you know? So it had 3 horns, and that got our attention because at that point in history, the Mayan mines were the only mines in anybody's inventory anywhere that only had 3 horns. Everybody else had 4. Mm-hmm. That made it different. And the description, he drew us a picture. It looked like an M&M with 3 horns sticking out of it. It's like, this is new. This is brand new. So we went and we got our lieutenant and the lieutenant commander that was with us, who was part of the Mine Countermeasure Task Force. He was the EOD officer on that team. And it's like, this is what we got. And it's pictures. Well, the pictures were useless. It was like, the things floating in the water, the guy's next to it, with his mask and snorkel, the dear mom, this is how I won the war kind of photo, those kind of photos. And then they blew it up. I'm like, oh, great. We've got this thing. We have no idea. Nobody's ever seen one before, and the only one they've ever found has been blown up. So they're headed off. They disappear for a while over to the SEAL team place and to do all of the stuff that they did, contact reports and all that. And we that was an interesting trip because we were all armed inside. We all carried. And in Jubail, they had the Scuds, or they had the air defense, the Patriot missile battery there in Jubail, and they had this big soccer field, and they had the trailers with the pizza and the burgers and the souvenirs and all that, and everybody's running around, mostly Marines. And I had this young woman Marine come up to me and said, "Excuse me, petty officer, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Can you explain to me why your weapon is different than everybody else's here?" And I looked around. Everybody else was carrying an M16. I was carrying an M14. And I said, well, they asked me what I wanted to carry in this here war, and I wanted something with a little more reaching power. I want to be able to get them before they can think about getting me. Truth was, by the time I got to the team, all the M16, they'd run out of M16s, and it was, you can have an M14 or a shotgun. Well, I'm not taking a shotgun to the desert. Later on, I ended up with an M60, but yeah. So anyway, so they did all that. We went back to Abu Dhabi, and a couple of days after Christmas, they called us up and said, "Go get one. Pack your stuff. Get back to Jubail. We want one." So we got up there. We packed all our stuff, and it was New Year's Eve. We got there about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We landed. We started unpacking our stuff, and they came over and said, "Okay, we've got one." What was happening was the Iraqis had made these mines for Desert Storm. They were brand new, but they were based off of the old Russian models. Mm-hmm. But with most underwater mines, you've got the moored mines, not the ones that lay on the bottom, but the moored mines. You've got this heavy anchor, and you've got this steel cable that holds the thing in place. Well, what the Iraqis did was they took this 1/4-inch cotton line and put one strand of steel wire just wrapped around the outside of it, and they dropped these things in the water. So when the weather would get rough and the seas would get rough, they'd snap that line and come popping to the surface.
Now, were they laying on the bottom?
Well, the anchor was on the bottom, and they were like 35 feet below the surface. But when the seas got rough and they bounced around, the line holding them to the anchor would break, and they'd come popping to the surface and float around. So they had one that was, they said, "We've got one, here you go." And they didn't get a chance to take too much. Some basic stuff, boat. We got our Zodiac, little F-470 Zodiac with a 25 horsepower motor, some Kevlar line to tow the thing with. I gave Brian, who was one of our guys that went, gave him the GPS and said, "This is how you work it," and an HF radio, and said, "Okay, guys, off you go." And they went out. They had one that had broken free and was bouncing against the legs of an oil rig, and these guys are on this oil rig trying with a fire hose trying to keep this thing from banging in and blowing up on the oil rig. So they got out there, they hooked it up, they checked it all out, and they started. The mission brief was, get this thing, get it over to this tugboat, this Saudi Navy tugboat, hook it up to the tugboat, tow it to Ras Al Ghar, way up north near Kafji. Tow it up there. We're going to beach it, we're going to de-arm it, we're going to send it back to Office of Naval Intelligence so they can figure out what to do with these things, figure out render safe and all that. So they go over to the tugboat with this thing, and the tugboat captain's like, "No, I don't care what they told you, you're not hooking that to my tugboat. But we will give you all of the gasoline that you can use." So they start going off, and there was a Saudi Navy cruiser and a Saudi Navy tugboat, and our guys in this little F-470, and F-470 is maybe 8 feet long, just tiny little thing, and they're going, "Okay, this won't be too bad." until the sun went down. One thing most people don't understand is, except for us and the crown navies, other world navies don't steam at night. When the sun goes down, they drop their anchor and they stay. So the sun's going down, they're going like, sorry, see you in the morning. And off they went. They were gone. And so here's these guys. Fortunately, they had the GPS, but they're in the middle of the Persian Gulf at night with, you know, in a rubber boat with this mine towing behind them. They were just about out of gas when they came across the place where the tugboat and the destroyer had anchored for the night. They got a lot more gas. Finished the night. They just before sunup they got to Ras Al Ghar, to the military base there. Had it, and they just parked the mine kind of offshore a little bit. We'd gone up that morning. We drove up there, got everything set, got the beach ready for it, pulled it, rigged it, and got the thing up on the beach and secured for the day. And that took us most of the day on New Year's Day.
How big is this mine?
This mine is, and you'll see, I mean, you got a picture of it on the disc, but it's about this big around and about that high.
3 feet across or so?
About 2.5 feet across,
okay.
yeah. And they named it the Lugum 145. I have no idea what Lugum stands for, but 145 because it was 145 kilos, so a little over 300 pounds of explosive, they say. It didn't feel like that, but there were 4 of us lifting the thing after we stripped it. So, so the next day after New Year's, we went out. And it got really crazy about that time because we went out to de-arm it. There was a Saudi Navy EOD team with us, and while I can't tell you how we did it, it happened in 2 stages. So the first stage, Brian and our lieutenant, and those 2 had both been on this boat, on this Zodiac all night long. Mm-hmm. They went down and I went down. Brian and I had figured out a way to get this thing open so that we could see what's inside of it from a distance. So we went down, we took lots and lots of photos and measurements and stuff like that. Set up to get to do it, to do the initial render safe. Came back, off we go. So we wait our time after the first thing is done. And actually we came back, we're getting ready to do our remote procedure, but it was prayer time, so we had to wait until after prayer time was done. So they did that. We did the procedure. We waited our time, and then Brian was going to go back down by himself, go down by himself, check it out, do the second part of the procedure to completely de-arm the thing, because it has to be done in a couple stages. But the Saudi team was worried that they wanted to go down there too. You can't go down there. You know, this is the most dangerous part. Before, yeah, fine, but this time, no. And so they sent a radio operator. We didn't know it until later. They sent a radio operator over there with an HF radio, which is bad news around some of this stuff. And he's trying to hide behind a sand dune so he can tell his CO what we're doing. I guess they were afraid that we were going to do some secret thing and not tell them. But we finally got all that squared away and straightened out and got everybody around. Brian finished de-arming it, and off we went. Later, and then sent it off to ONI, back here, and then back to Abu Dhabi for us. When Desert Storm started really rolling for real, we were ready. But the thing was, we were going to be doing one of the things we were going to do was we were going to be jumping mines because they were so flimsy with their anchor cables, they were popping up all over the place. So we were going to send people out on the ships and jump them with explosive charges and blow them up. So I trained. I was the only guy who'd ever jumped out of a helicopter on my team. So I trained my team, and I trained another team out of Hawaii that was there to help us on how to do that properly. And then there wasn't room on the Navy ships for the teams. So they rented 2 ocean-going tugboats, the Vivi and the Selena. There's a picture of the Vivi on the disc. A little blue and white ocean-going tug. So we got all of our stuff on there, and we headed north. And I mean, carriers, battleships, all of the cruisers, and all the other stuff, and then these 2 little good ship lollipop things behind. We did. Some of our guys went and did some of that. They jumped a couple of mines and blew them up. Basically, by the time we were done with that trip, the lieutenant and Brian got Bronze Stars for the overnight deal with the mine. The rest of us had done enough. We all got Navy Commendations medals with valor. So we all walked away with that. But one morning, we woke up, and I was always the first one up. And I was the radio operator. And it was really strange being the radio operator on a foreign vessel. Our captain and chief engineer were from England. Our cook was from India. Our first mate and the rest of the crew were from the Philippines. Now we've got ComSec stuff, we've got secret no foreign stuff, we've got all this stuff. What do? And I'm the radio operator. Well, my HF radio, my little backpack radio, was up on the bridge, and my little crypto unit, I slept with it under my arm. And so I get up in the morning, I go up to the bridge, and there's the Tripoli at anchor, and searchlights everywhere. And so I asked the captain of the Vivi, I say, Crawford, what's going on? He says, I have no idea. I just got up here. Of course, the Filipinos don't speak much English. He says, all I know is there's 2 people missing on the Tripoli. They think they've fallen overboard. Oh, okay. And I knew the guys on the trip. It was from the helicopter squadron, the minesweeping squadron, and we knew them in Abu Dhabi. We worked with all these guys, And so it's like, well, they probably fell off the flight deck when something happened, and they float. They've got this reflective stuff. We'll find them in 5 minutes. It'll be easy. Well, so I called the Tripoli. Hey, what do you need? Just stand by. Everything's, don't just stand by. Okay, fine. So we're cruising around and we're looking for guys in the water, and we've got night vision goggles and all that other stuff. We're looking for these guys in the water, and the sun starts coming up, and we've been at this for over an hour, and I'm thinking there's something really, really wrong here. And all of a sudden, over the radio, I heard the British minesweeper call the Tripoli and say, give us what's going on? And that was when they came back and said, we've got an approximate 15-foot diameter hole below the water, just below the water line. And just below the water line. Oh, hang on.
Did this British ship had a hole in it?
It was the USS Tripoli.
Oh, USS Tripoli.
USS Tripoli. The USS Tripoli, which caused a little bit of embarrassment because the Tripoli was the flagship of the minesweeping task force. But we'd been moved out to an area. The task force that we were with the U.S. was
Are you on board ship?
I'm on board the tugboat. Yeah. Okay. So we were with the Wisconsin, but we had been swept with silkworm radar, and they wanted the minesweeping task force to be safe.
Silkworm radar.
Silkworm. Silkworm is a Chinese anti-ship cruise missile that the Iraqis had. So they moved us out somewhere safe, supposedly. Then we ended up with a hole we ended up in a minefield that they didn't know about. And we were told that the Iraqis didn't mix their mines. So if it was a minefield with bottom mines, that's all we were going to find. If it was a minefield with moored mines, that was all we were going to find. They were wrong. Because a little later that morning, I want to say it was the Vincennes, all the stuff's in the book, got hit by a bottom mine, broke it in half. And that's what they're designed to do. They're designed to put a big air bubble under the ship so that it can't support its own weight, and it breaks its back, breaks it in half. and it did the job. But the damage control crews on that ship, boy, they held that sucker together. And there were places afterwards when we were looking at it, there were places where you could be on one side of the ship and see daylight out the other side of the ship. It was just like, those guys were just, they were amazing. So we ended up that day, we ended up doing the damage assessment on the Tripoli. So we did the diving, we took still photos, we took video photos. It was pretty impressive.
Was it a mine that hit the Tripoli?
Hit the Tripoli, yeah. It was one of the ones like we had on the beach that day.
Oh, the mine.
It was an underwater mine. It was a Lugum 145 underwater moored mine. Yeah, hit the Tripoli. It's like, oh man, busy day. You know, we discover the hard way. We're stuck in the middle of a minefield, and now we got to get out. And it took us the rest of the day.
How do you get out of a minefield?
You have to sweep the field and figure out where everything is. And you know, there were times when it was we'd be headed this direction. It's like, okay, over there you're going to go in between two of them. Be very careful. I mean, literally, you could look overboard because they were only about 10, 15 feet below the surface. You'd be standing on the deck as you're going by, and you look up and you could see the thing in the water. You know, it got pretty scary that day. Then they did. Somebody had an idea. They really were worried about the silkworm missiles, and so somebody had this idea, and they called us over to the Tripoli one day and said, "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you guys are going to take this Williams sled. Basically, it's a target sled. It's not much bigger than this dining room, but it's got all these special little metal cone-shaped things on it, the radar reflectors. So when that thing's floating around, it looks as big as an aircraft carrier. And the idea was we were going to tow this out to some area away from the fleet and set it loose, so that they would hope the Iraqis would think that, okay, that's the biggest thing in the Gulf, we're going to shoot at that. Sounds like a reasonable idea. So we're towing this puppy out to the area where they want it, and we're just about there, and they say, no, we've changed our mind, bring it back. Okay, fine. So we go back to the Tripoli, and it's like, okay, where do you want this thing? Well, you guys just hang on to it for a while. Okay. Now the VV and the Selena they're civilian boats. They're supposed to be non-combatants. They're not supposed to have anything, and suddenly we've become the biggest target in the ocean. And it wasn't but a couple of days later, we didn't even know. We had no idea. Most of the folks are down. Most of the guys on my team were off, you know, down watching TV or movie or something. Being a Buddhist, I found a spot on the fantail behind the Connex box where I could be alone and nobody bother me and do that. And so I was doing my Buddhist prayers one night, and just before sunset, and off just after the ship, I see this boom, like, ooh, quite a fireworks show. I wonder what that was. I went and told my buddy, hey man, you should have seen what just went on back there. You know, it's like, I don't know what it was, but we found out the next day. At our afternoon brief the next day, they said, yeah, that target, you know, the Iraqis fired 2 silkworm missiles at it, and one of our ships, I didn't see how they got it, I just saw the explosions in the air. One of our ships took it out with the Sea Whiz, and the HMS Gloucester took the other one out with a Sea Dart missile. And I remember thinking, like, you know, if they hadn't have done that, I'd have been the only one on this boat that knew how we died. You know, that would have been it. You know, so we did that, and then you know, later on they put us on the USS Impervious for a while, one of the minesweepers, and we did some of that. We had our bigger Zodiac behind it. And one night they said, look, you gotta get that off the back of the ship. We've got to go over here for a meeting. So the lieutenant and I, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. Lieutenant and I got in the Zodiac. We took it off to the side, and that was the night that Kuwait City fell. And we were like just a couple miles off the coast watching the show, and I had never seen anything like it. there were so many planes in the sky that it looked like LA at rush hour. I couldn't figure out how they didn't run into each other. You know, all kinds of stuff going off here and there. It was quite a show. After that, we went back on the VV, and we went back to we went back to Abu Dhabi on the VV. Got all the rest of our equipment packed up, back to Bahrain. Spent a few more days in Bahrain, just kind of taking it easy, getting stuff ready to go home, and then flew back to the Philippines. After that, came back from the war. Just in April, 2 months later, Mount Pinatubo erupted, buried us. Did that. Families were evacuated. We stayed. We dug out. My family came back in. My family came back the middle of September, although I didn't get to see them for 3 weeks because they were flying in as I was flying out. I came back to the States for 3 weeks. I went to airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia during that period of time. Once I got back to the Philippines, I was still doing mine countermeasure work. Ended up going to Australia for like a 6 week exercise. We left before Thanksgiving. We came back a couple days before Christmas. It was great out there with the Royal Australian Navy, diving every day. It was a good exercise, big exercise. And we had sea lions. We had everybody there. Came home for Christmas. 2 days after Christmas, we were back on a plane, headed back to Australia for a Secret Service gig with George H.W. Bush. Spent a few days there with that. That spring, they were shutting down the Philippines, and the unit was moving to Guam, and we went right before that was happening. My team went to Thailand for Cobra Gold. We were there for a little over a month. The exercise didn't go the full length because that was the year 1992. That was the year they had all the demonstrations in Bangkok, and they shot some people in Bangkok, and everybody fled the country. We weren't going anywhere for a while, but yeah. And that was, we took one of my Harris RF 5000 radios, and it broke down, and we were supposed to go out for a 3-hour shakedown the first day on this Thai minesweeper. And our diving doctor went with us, our DMO went with us, and that was when we found out, no, we're not going back. It's like, wait, I got to go back, and our radio's broken. So the next day they put me and Doc Robinson and an English-speaking Thai officer on the beach, literally in the middle of nowhere, but there was where we'd anchored for the night in this bay. So on this bay was this little, like a resort, but they'd never seen an American before. This is where the locals went to get away for the weekend. This guy threw us in the back of a pickup truck, took us to a crossroads with a highway where we were waiting for a bus that never came. And the Thai officer met some guy that was passing through that had a pickup truck. He put us in the back of the pickup truck, and it took us into Bangkok, where we got on a bot bus. We're hitchhiking across the Thai countryside. Got on a bot bus back to Sadaheep. I got the radio parts, got a shower at Doc's hotel room, and then the duty driver took me back down to wherever it was we came from, got on the ship, and off we went. And that was the last exercise that Mobile Unit 5 did out of the Philippines, because when we got back, C-130s got us back. We didn't even unpack. They just literally, we drove our trucks and trailers off of one C-130, put them on another C-130, and they left for Guam. Went to Japan after that for 3 years. Did a bunch of stuff in Japan, including got in a couple of responses after the Tokyo subway attacks. Mm-hmm. I was there for that. 1 week later, a package came that looked really suspicious, and one of the Japanese guys in the mail room said, "Oh, by the way, this." I said, "What makes you think this is suspicious?" It came from the same little town where these folks have their headquarters, and it was years before I found out that there's some stuff in it. But but it
was it The bomb or what?
No, actually, what it looked like when we X-rayed it, it looked like packages. It looked like the same cellophane wrapped packages that they used on the subway, and it wasn't. It was actually squid that had been laced with some stuff. The idea was to get people really sick, biological stuff. But it was years before I found out, and I don't know what the classification level is on any of this stuff. So I just try to keep it. But it was years. I mean, it was 2000.
How long have you been in the Navy?
I spent 24 years in the Navy. Yeah, 24 years in the Navy. That was the biggest thing that happened in Japan. We enjoyed the time there.
When did you get your discharge?
I got my discharge October 31st, 1998. Yeah, after Japan, I went to Mobile Unit 3 in San Diego, and just had a pretty good tour there. That's when I got sick. I developed a heart condition when I turned 40, lost my dive quals, and ended up being the in-service recruiter and sending about 150 people into the EOD pipeline. Ended up retiring after that. So it was a long career, and there's some pretty good highlights in there. Yeah.
Would you join the Navy again?
Oh, in a heartbeat. In a heartbeat. I think the worst part of my Navy career was retiring, because I didn't want to. But I was a chief. I was an E7, and higher tenure was 24 for a chief. I couldn't stay any longer, or I would have stayed for as long as I could.
I'd like to do a word association.
Okay.
The first one is boot camp.
Navy.
Yellow Brick Road.
Most people think the Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz. That was our first thought. Yeah. Wizard of Oz.
Desert Shield.
Big leagues. The big league.
Desert Storm.
Desert Storm. The word out. Surreal. It didn't. My part of the war was much different than yours, and it was pretty surrealistic. Mayan. Diving. Lots of time in the water.
George Bush.
President.
Colin Powell.
Amazing. He's my hero. I just love that man.
Arnold Schwarzkopf.
Oh, Schwarzkopf. He's okay. Yeah.
How do you want to be remembered?
The world's a little better because I was here.
We have 2 minutes left. What do you want to talk about?
I don't know. What do we do? What do we talk about? You know, the Navy. God, the Navy was such an amazing time of my life, but it wasn't necessarily the glory days as such. You know, the Navy set me up. For what came later. You know, since I've retired from the Navy, I've traveled the country doing ordnance cleanup on old bases, from chemical ordnance to standard ordnance. I've had the opportunity after 9/11. I had the opportunity here in Oklahoma at the National Homeland Security Training Center at Camp Gruber to train responders and how to respond to chemical weapons attacks and biological weapons attacks. I've been a radar operator at China Lake, and now I work with Homeland Security. So everything that I did in the first half of my adult life set me up to be successful in the second half. So yeah, the Navy, just can't say enough about it.
Well, sir, this is an excellent interview.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for your service and thank you for the interview.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
And again, this is January 26th, 2018. My name is Joe Todd. This has been an interview with John Martin in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is